we will continue with our discussion on, we discussed the foundations of ethics. Just to refresh your memory, we looked at two aspects of ethics, what we call normative ethics, and also what is called meta-ethics, or the concerning the justification of moral life. And then we looked at as the basis of Buddhist morality, we looked at certain foundational teachings started from Kalama Sutta, which provides the rational basis for Buddhist ethics and also freedom of thought. And then we looked at how to define what is good and bad, kusala and akusala, and particularly where Buddha says to Kalamas that when they know for themselves whether something is related to kusala or whether something is related to akusala, that has to be, behaved accordingly. And we looked at, next we look at the outcome of an action, consequence, and from that we moved on to two different discourses, Bahitika Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, where Venerable Ananda describes this aspect, and also in that the account you find this concept of Vinyu Purisa. Vinyu Purisa is intelligent person as the criterion in society in order to determine what is good or bad. What the Vinyu Purisas say is important. And then we looked at Ambalattika Rahulavada Sutta, where the criterion is if something to be acceptable, it has to be not harm or the affliction of the doer, oneself, the other, and both. So that is the criterion. So Buddha says to Rahula, if some action is not good for you, not good for the other, not good for both yourself and the other, then you should not do that, and so on. Then we discussed whether Buddhist ethical theory is consequentialist. That is a modern ethical debate. The theory that idea that Buddhist ethical theory is consequentialist is whether Buddhism takes only the consequence or the result of an action as the only criterion. Now the problem, the potential problem will be when we say that consequence or the result of an action is the only criterion, then what happens is, we will not look at other things. If something produces agreeable results, good results, then we will go for it. But it depends on what we consider, what we think to be the good result. Sometimes people like things to do if it is advantageous for them. So you have a good result. But what about the other people? They don't have a good result from that. Right? So the good result has to be, if at all, it has to be for yourself and for the other. We will discuss this matter a little bit in detail later, but then we looked at this. The Buddhism lays much emphasis on happiness as the criterion of good actions. Does this mean that Buddhism ethics is a utilitarian? Actually, this utilitarian ethics is the concept that is discussed in modern Western ethical theory. Utilitarianism means you look at the utility, you look at the usefulness You look at the result of an action, then go for it. But you know, when you go for the action, the result of the action, then you think result for the action to whom? Person who does or the persons who are get affected by that. Utilitarian theory says that maximum happiness for maximum number of people. Now, then the problem is if you do something to get maximum happiness for maximum number of people, what about the other group? Like say for example in a democratic system, we always go for the majority vote. But what about the minority then? You can establish a government by majority vote. That means that out of 100, 60%. But what about the 40% people? What about their interest? So when you go for something good for majority of the people, we are sacrificing really the minority of the people, lesser number of people. Sometimes, you know, that lesser number of people can be the right people, morally right people. But in society, things can be popular which are not very good. Popular things may be not very good, but popular means more people like it. So in the democratic system, you go for, if something is liked by more people, you go for it. But then the issue is that simply because something is good for majority people, is it ethically good? Here you can see that the word good we are using in several different sense, right? You know, good in the one sense will be like it is desirable. Good in another sense will be it is ethically good, morally good. Okay. Now, very often we use the word good in ordinary sense. It is good to do something. It is good to drink water, you know, something like that. There is nothing ethical or moral about it. But then we are also using the word good in the moral sense. Now, when if something is good or desirable, there is a question whether it is also morally good. Do you see the difference between the two? We can say that something is good in the sense desirable. We like to do it, but then is it morally good? You know, that's a associated but different thing. And then is Buddhist ethics relative or absolute? Does Buddhism hold that they are universally valid ethical principles? Actually, each of these things we need to discuss in detail. But you know, we will not have time to discuss these things in detail. But even if you take this very last one, whether the ethics is absolute or whether ethics is relative. Now, the idea is that relativism and absolutism in ethics. Now, relativism in ethics means you consider ethical principles to be relative. Now, relativism in ethics. Okay, so we say relativism in ethics. Against relativism is what we have is absolutism in ethics. So relativism, absolutism. Now, what is the Buddhist position? Do we say that ethics are relative? Now, if we say relative, what we mean by this is that they can be relative to different conditions, or whether ethics are absolute. Absolute means you can't change it. They are really unchangeable. They should be valid anywhere, everywhere in the world. So, what is the Buddhist position? Now, you know, this is something we can, you know, we must be able to discuss. Now when we look at the Buddhist ethics, we can look at the Sila, we can look at the monastic Sila. So when we look at Sila, is it relative or is it absolute? Can Sila be changed or can Sila be unchanging? Now what is the Buddhist position? What is the Buddha's position on this? Okay. Now, I mean, there is no simple answer to this kind of question, but we need to look at different situations and instances of ethics in Buddhism. Now, for example, the other day I told you about the Immanuel Kant, this Western philosopher, who thought that ethical principles are absolute. They have to be universal. Now that is what he said. But then that is an example for absolutism. However, what is the Buddhist ethics? Is it absolutist or is it relative? Now, if we say ethics is relative, what we mean is ethics can be relative to different situations, different countries, even ultimately different people or different societies. But when we say absolute, absolute means you can't change it. What do you think? Now, for example, you can look at something like 5 precepts for the lay people. Not killing, not stealing, not having wrong sexual relations, not lying and not taking alcoholic drink. What do you think about these 5 precepts? Are they absolute or are they relative? What do you think? Are they absolute? Absolute in the sense 5 precepts must be applicable to all the lay Buddhist people everywhere. Whether they are in Myanmar, whether they are in Sri Lanka, whether they are in any other country, 5 precepts. Or can you change 5 precepts? Can you take only 3 or 4? I mean, if you can change, if you can take 3 or 4, we can say that it is in a way relative. But most of you wanted to say that it is no, it is not relative, so you have to take all 5. But then, look at about it. The Buddha gave these precepts as okay for all lay Buddhist people. But can you imagine a country or society where some of these precepts cannot be observed by people? Some of these precepts may not be valid. What do you think about hunting society, where people have to kill animals to eat? What about the first precept? Can they be observing the first precept? Can they be Buddhist then? Can they be Buddhist by only taking 4 precepts? What about fishing community? Fishermen, can they observe the first precept? But can't they be Buddhist? So you think that with 4 precepts you can be a Buddhist, right? See, then that means that we are saying that ethics is somewhat relative. So in different societies, because now try to think. Now if we take the first precept, not killing, we know that if it is a hunting society or if it is a fishing community, the first precept will be difficult to observe. On the other hand, what do you think about the killing? Can we say that killing is good? No. Now, if we say we cannot say killing is good, then we accept that although some people cannot do, although some people cannot practice, we admit that killing is bad. Now, is killing bad anywhere, everywhere, for any society? What do you think? We take the first precept. Can you imagine a society or country or situation where killing is okay? However, if a Buddhist country has to go to war with some other country, then what? You are in a war. In a war, people kill each other, right? So, what is the situation? Can a Buddhist country go for war? Imagine a situation, a Buddhist country is not invading other country. Buddhist country is just living by itself. But somebody comes and invade your country. Then what should the country do? What should the army do? They have to protect the country, right? Now, if they have to kill, what is the situation? Can they be still Buddhist or not? Can a Buddhist country can have an army? Can that army kill? Now think about this kind of situations. Like on the one hand we say abstaining from killing. But there can be many situations where this precept can be challenged. Challenge in the sense there can be difficult situations. In a very secure, limited society, you don't have to kill, you don't have to steal, you don't have to do anything wrong. But in the society, sometimes it is difficult. What about particularly if you take the fishing people? Now people go for fishing. And then in this country and in many Buddhist countries, there are other countries, then donors offer for the meal, they offer fish. But then somebody killed these fish, right? Now, if we eat the fish, we are sort of saying that it's okay. You don't go and kill. You don't go fishing. But of course, somebody else go for fishing and we are benefiting from that, isn't it? Now, just for example, I think like this. If one day we say that in Myanmar, all the Buddhist people stop eating fish, what will happen? That fish will not be killed, right? What do you think? If all Buddhists get together and stop eating fish, then what happens? So we know that we are also responsible for it a little bit, right? Although we don't go kill. Now the issue is this. We don't go into too much direct in that. But what do we have to say about those people who kill fish for us? We don't do that. But somebody is doing it. As Buddhist, how should you respond to this? These are, anyway, we know that there is no easy answer. But those are the questions sometimes people can raise. Okay? People can raise these questions. Because in any society we know that everybody is not going to do fishing. But always there is some group of people who are doing that. Even if you take a country like Sri Lanka, where the Buddhist other people majority, but there are different social groups who go fishing. Of course, they go fishing because people eat, and people eat because they provide fish. So it goes both ways. Okay. Now, for example, you go to shop in order to buy fish. No fish in the shop. Are you going to the sea to fish? No. You come back. So you can say if it is not in the shop, we are not buying. So we buy it because it is in the shop. And then the shop people say that I bring fish because people come and buy. Right? If people don't come and buy, there will not be fish in the shop. So you can see that it is a, how to say, it is a dependent phenomenon. Okay? People want it and then people provide it, kind of supply and demand. There is a demand, so there is a supply. So we can say that if there is no demand, no supply. But anyhow, my question is this. I am not saying that eating fish is good or bad, no, that's a different thing. But what I am saying is, when we say first precept, there are a lot of situations where some people cannot observe it. So then the issue is that whether the ethics is absolute or relative. In some sense, you have to be very careful. Now, for example, in the Vinaya, certain Vinaya rules Buddha has changed. Right? Buddha has changed certain Vinaya rules several times. Now, you can ask if they are absolute, the Buddha can't change. But Buddha has changed. How do you explain that? How do you understand that? Can you give me an example of instance where Buddha changed the rule? Buddha has changed the rule about what? Things like what? Now, for example, there is one Vinaya rule about wearing footwear, slippers. Now, that has been changed several times. So, usually some Vinaya rules were prescribed through the middle land, Majjhima Desa. But then outside Majjhima Desa, Buddha said that you can change it. Now you can see that certain things are valid in Majjhima Desa, certain things are not valid outside Majjhima Desa. Now that is a very clear example. Some ethics can be relative. So it is okay relative to Majjhima Desa, not okay when you go outside. Okay? Yeah. Now we have examples where Buddha has changed it. But do you think that Buddha will change any Vinaya rule like that? Do you think Buddha will change any Vinaya rule like that? One Vinaya rule to Majjhima Desa and another Vinaya rule to outside Majjhima Desa? What about the first precept, not killing? Will Buddha say that, okay, killing in the Majjhima Desa is not good, but outside Majjhima Desa, Myanmar or Sri Lanka or any other country is good? Can we say that? Why? What is the difference between? Now in the first case, about the wearing, about the footwear, Buddha said certain things okay for Majjhima Desa, outside Majjhima Desa you can do anything differently. But what about killing? Did the Buddha say, or will the Buddha say that killing is okay outside Majjhima Desa? Now do you see a difference between these Vinaya rules, precepts? Or, put the question another way, do you think that all the Vinaya rules are similar? How do you explain that Buddha changed certain rules, Buddha does not change certain rules? How do you explain? Why? Why Buddha did not change certain rules while he changed certain other rules? What is the reason? Now you see, this is why you really need to think from one issue to the other, because there is quite a lot to think about it. Now if you look at two Vinaya rules, one Vinaya rule is wearing footwear, okay, and then Buddha changed it. But the other Vinaya rule is, we say, killing. Now for the Upasampada monk, killing a human being is Parajika offense. Did the Buddha change it?
No.
No. What is the difference between wearing footwear and killing a human being? Do you see there are certain rules which are not really papa or crime, but there are certain things which are very basic and which are fundamentally wrong. Okay? Now, wearing footwear is something, it is not a, is it a wrong or right or wrong? No, it is actually a social matter. Maybe in the Buddha's time, the monks and the sramanas and they did not wear footwear. That's why. But when at the same time, during the same time, there were some other countries, other areas where people wore footwear. And when Buddhism went to those places, people expected monks to wear footwear. So then those monks came back and said, Venerable, sir, in this area where we are, then Buddha said, okay, go ahead, no problem. Now, but on the other hand, some monks, we say, for example, went to a fishing area. Now, if they came and said to the Buddha, well, in our area, all people go for fishing and they kill fish. So we can't observe the first precept. Will the Buddha change it? If not, why? Do you see a very important difference between these two types of moral rules? Okay. Now, actually, when it comes to absolutism and relativism, we can see that Buddha changed certain rules which are really connected to the social society, social life, regional things, how to wear the robe, whether to have the footwear or not, things like that. Those are basically about the behavior. But on the other hand, there are certain Vinaya rules which are fundamental to the monastic life. Fundamentally. Now, 5 precepts are for the lay people, but even the 5 precepts are also for the monks. 3rd precept becomes a little bit different, but usually. Now, in the Vinaya, we get this distinction of one is what is called Adi. Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila. The second one is Abhi Samacharika Sila. Now, what is the difference between the two? One is Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila. The other is Abhi Samacharika Sila. What is the difference between the two? What do you think? Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila and Abhi Samacharika Sila. You know this. What do you usually mean by Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila? In the Vinaya Pitaka, which books are included in Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila? Number 1. Why everybody is silent? What is Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila? Number 1. What are the Vinaya books that are included in that? Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila. What are they? What are they? How many people are Dhammacharyas here? Come on, what is the difference between? Okay, Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila means, the meaning of this concept is Adi Brahmacharyaka means the Vinaya rules that are fundamental to the monastic life. Adi means basic, fundamental. Brahmacharya means monastic life. The Vinaya rules fundamental to the monastic life. Now, in the Vinaya Pitaka, you have Parajika Pali, Pachitya Pali, Chullavaga Pali, Mahavagga Pali, Parivara Pali. In the Vinaya Pitaka, Parajika Pali and Pachitya Pali deal with Adi Brahmacharyaka Sila. In other words, they they deal with the pratimoksha, patimokkha. Okay? Yes or no? I'm sorry I'm spending time on this, but I think you know it, but nobody's talking, so I don't know whether you know it or not. That's why I'm. So, Adi Brahmacharya means the fundamental Vinaya rules. So, in the Vinaya Pitaka, Parajika Pali, Pachitya Pali. And then Abhi Samachara. Samachara means Sang Achara. Samachara means good behavior. Abhi Samacharika means the Vinaya rules related to good behavior. Now, in the Vinaya Pitaka, Chullavagga Pali and Mahavagga Pali discuss this aspect. Now, in the Chullavagga Pali, Mahavagga Pali, you don't have Pratimoksha rules, not Patimokha. But there are many other things like how to wear the robe, how to do the robes, what are the medicines you can use, and what are the kind of food you can eat, and there are lots of Vinaya traditions in Abhi Samacharika. Now, Adi Brahmacharika means very fundamental things. If you look at the Buddhist history, it's very important to note that 4 Parajikas and 13 Sanghadisesas, Chattaro Parajika, Terasa Sanghadisesa. These things have never been changed. But other things have been changed. The reason is certain things are Adi Brahmacharyaka, very fundamental rules of Vinaya. Certain other things are only about behavior. Now, the rules relevant to behavior can change depending on the situation. Right? Now, in the cold season, you wear certain manner, but in the hot season, you don't wear like that. So, it depends on the season, right? And then there are one Sikshapada was in the Majjhima Desa, Buddha, the monks were not having bath every day. But then when they go out, Majjhima Desa, in some areas they were expected to have bath every day. Then Buddha said that that's okay, that's fine. Now because that is something related to the behavior, very basic social behavior. So in some places, there are certain things, those are nothing fundamentally to do with monastic life, they are related to more to the social life. So as a result, so Adi Brahmacharya and Abhi Samacharika. Now why I am bringing out this distinction is when you look at the Buddha's attitude and the behavior toward these things, we can say that Adi Brahmacharya were basically, the position was absolutist in the sense, they were not changed. But then Abhi Samacharika were, in a sense, we can say that Buddha's stance on those things, towards those things is relativist. Because these things were changed. These things were changing according to the situation. Not all, but many Vinaya rules related to Abhi Samacharika Sikha were changed depending on the situation. Now, if you look at the question again, is Buddhist ethics relative or absolute? Does Buddhism hold that there are universally valid ethical principles? Now, this is a very, very important question when we look at ethics. Now, when we say whether Buddhism accepts universally valid ethical principle, we really have to look at it in a very broad perspective. Now, basically in the Buddhism, we have monastic Vinaya rules and we have lay Vinaya rules. Okay? Now, monastic Vinaya rules are not applicable to lay people. Right? Lay people don't have observed 4 Parajikas and 13 Sanghadisesas. But on the other hand, if you look at carefully, there are certain things in the 4 Parajikas that are common for both lay people and the Sangha. Like if you take not killing. Now, not killing is not only for the monks, not only for the lay people. Not killing is for all people. So can you see that while Buddhist monastic Vinaya is only for the monks, lay people don't have to observe it. For example, if you take Mala Gandha Vilepana, Uchchasayana Mahasayana, Jata Rupa Rajata Patiggahana, they are not for lay people. They are only for the monastic community. But what about killing? What about stealing? What about telling lies? Taking alcoholic drink? And the third precept says, for the lay people, abstain from wrong sexual behavior. For the monastic, it says, abstain from sexual behavior. So for the lay people, right sexual behavior is okay. Now you see certain changes, but on the other hand, while certain things are changing, there are certain other things like killing, stealing, telling lies, things like that. They are common to all. Whether you are a Buddhist monk or lay person, killing is bad. Whether you are a monk or lay person, stealing is bad. Now, if that is so, can we say that according to Buddhism, certain moral principles are absolute, certain moral principles can be relative? Is that the Buddhist position? Can we say that? In Buddhism, can we say that certain moral principles are absolute, certain moral principles are relative? What do you think? I really want to hear from you. Does it make sense? I mean, can you see the point? Certain moral principles can be absolute, like certain moral principles can be relative. You can change, but killing you can't change. So, but anyhow, I will leave the question with you for you to think more. The question is Buddhist ethics relative or absolute? Does Buddhism hold that there are universally valid ethical principles? Now, if we say that yes, according to Buddhism, like certain principles we can say universally valid. Like not killing is a good thing anywhere in the world, but not stealing is good thing anywhere in the world. But for any of these things, if we think that there are some exceptions, there are some situations where killing is okay, stealing is okay, then those situations we have to be looking very carefully, right? As I said, okay, as a principle, killing is not good. But what about if somebody comes to kill you? Will you allow him to kill you, or will you try to save your life? In the effort to save your life, you kill the other person. Then what? Is it right or wrong? Things like that. These ethical questions, you have to remember, ethical questions are not easy questions, okay? Ethical questions are not easy because ethical questions can open for different answers. Ethical questions can be open for different answers. So they are not easy, very easy questions. So there is no, one correct answer for them. So that state, you will have to be aware of. And then we looked at this concept of acceptable authority, attadipateya, lokadipateya, dhammadipateya. Actually, these things were said to you because initially in the Kalama Sutta we found that Kalama Sutta rejects certain type of authority. But on the other hand, the concept of authority, attadipateya, you consider yourself, your own position. You get it as the criterion of deciding whether you should do something or not. Lokadipateya. Lokadipateya means the world, society. And then Dhammadipataya, Dhamma means teaching of the Buddha, but it basically means what is good and bad and right and wrong. Dhamma, what is right, what is correct. So Dhamma has a very broad meaning there. So Dhamma, you don't violate the Dhamma in the sense, not in the narrow sense of what the Buddha taught, but you have to understand Dhamma in the broad sense. Dhamma is what is right in a situation. So you don't violate that. So Dhammadipataya means you accept the authority of the Dhamma. So when you are faced with the situation, whether you should do or something or not do something, then of course you can think whether Dhamma approves it or not. Now if it is not according to Dhamma, even if you want to do that, you can say that I will not do that. So simply because it violates the Dhamma. But the concept of Dhamma is very, very important there, because Dhamma is not really not only the teaching of the Buddha, but I put the teaching of the Buddha there because ultimately teaching of the Buddha is about what is good and what is kusala for the human beings and society. So in that sense it is the Buddha's teaching. But when it comes to violation issue, actually it is not only Buddha's teaching, it refers to a much larger principle of we can say righteousness, goodness. Sometimes Dhamma is translated as good law. So not only the Buddha's teaching, but basically what is the broad concept of good. So Dhammadipataya means that, so you don't violate Dhamma. You don't violate what is considered to be the right thing in the world, Dhamma. Now we have a statement like in the Dhamma, Dhammo have rakhati dhammachari. Dhammachari, the person who follows the Dhamma, is protected by the Dhamma. So in other words, it means the person who is doing good will be protected by the goodness. Idea is that there is some kind of universal principle. Some places we have Atti Loke Sila Guno. Atti Loke Sila Guno. There is Sila and Guna in the world. But ultimately Sila and Guna have to be in people, not in the world. But basically there is a sense of Sila and Guna, Dhamma. Okay? So I think all of you, it is very important for you to really think deeply about this concept of Dhamma. What does Dhamma mean? Okay? Dhamma has so many meanings. Okay? Dhamma doesn't mean not only Dhamma. When we say Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, we say Buddha's teaching. But when you go to a broader context, you can see that Dhamma has many meanings. Now when we say Dhammo have rakhati dhammachari, it has a broad meaning. Okay? So the Dhammadipataya means you really take the authority of the Dhamma. In other words, you are under the Dhamma. In the Visuddhimagga, you find the following stanza. Dhanang chaje yopana anghetu angang chaje jivitang rakhamano angang dhanang jivitang chapi sabbang chaje naro dhamma manussaranto. Have you heard that? Dhanang chaje yopana anghetu. You sacrifice your wealth in order to protect your physical body. Dhanang chaje yopana anga. Anga means physical limbs. Angang chaje jivitang rakhamano. In order to protect your life, you sacrifice your limbs. If doctor says your hand has to be amputated in order to live, you say okay. Sometimes people's legs are amputated. Why? Because even without leg you want to live. So angang chaje jeevitan rakkamano. Then angang dhanang jeevitan chapi sabbang. All three, physical limbs, wealth, physical limbs and the life. Chaje naro dhamma manussaranto. One should sacrifice for the dhamma. Chaje naro dhamma manussaranto. Okay? Angang dhanang jeevitan chapi sabbang. Chaje naro dhamma manussaranto. So that means in order to preserve the dhamma, in order to follow the dhamma, you do all kinds of, you should do all kinds of sacrifices. Which in other words means dhamma is higher than wealth, dhamma is higher than physical limbs, dhamma is higher than even the life. You know, at some point, you know, you even sacrifice your life in order to protect the dhamma. So you have attadipateya, lokadipateya, dhammadipateya. You accept the authority of these things. And another important thing is the concept of vinyu purisa. Intelligent people. This concept of intelligent people is again in the Dhamma very important. When it comes to the deciding what is right and wrong, intelligent people are very important. Who are the intelligent people? Vinyu Purisa. In the Karaniyametta Sutta, you have Nacha Khuddang Samachare Kinchi Yena Vinyu Pare Upadeyo. Right? Nacha Khuddang Samachare Kinchi Yena Vinyu Pare Upadeyo. You must not do anything, even the smallest, which will be not approved by the intelligent people. Vinyu Purisa. So Buddha always takes Vinyu Purisa as the standard, or Vinyu Purisa as the criterion. Okay? Who are the Vinyu Purisas? What is the meaning of Vinyu Purisa? Who are the intelligent people? In the Kalama Sutta, Buddha said that not to accept anything because of it is in the book or it is said by your teacher or anything. But can all of us behave like Kalama Sutta? When we are below 18, can we make our own moral decisions? If you are not educated enough, can you make your own moral decisions? If you don't know Dhamma enough, can you make your own moral decisions? Can we ask a 15-year-old person to make his or her own moral decisions? Can we? Then who are the Vinyu Purisa? How are we going to decide? Now if we really take Kalama Sutta says Manusavena, Ma Paramparaya. Don't take because it is in the religious tradition, so on. But then how are we going to make decisions? How do we really decide what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong? Can each one of us decide? I mean, that is what Kalama Sutta says. Yada tumme kalama attana vajaneyata, when you know for yourself. But can we do that? Can all of us do that? Even the small children, can they do that? You know, this has to be understood very carefully. Kalama Sutta was taught by the Buddha to Kalamas who were a mature group of people. They were very intelligent. So what the Buddha said to the Kalamas, you cannot say that it is applicable to everybody. Okay? What the Buddha said to the Kalamas is really the Kalamas were kind of Vinyu Purisa. Vinyu Purisa means mature person. Vinyu Purisa means mature person. People who have a good sense of morality. People who have a good moral education. So Vinyu Purisa is not ordinary people, okay? Vinyu Purisa. So if a Vinyu Purisa says something is bad, you have to take it very seriously. Because Vinyu Purisa means really a educated person educated doesn't mean having university degree or anything, but educated in the sense, knowing good and bad, right and wrong, knowing about the world. So Vinyu Purisa is a very important criterion in the Buddhist tradition, often mentioned in the discourses. Now in the Karani Metta Sutta we have Vinyu Purisa. Kuddan Samachare, Kinchi and Vinyu, even the smallest thing, Vinyu Purisas don't approve, don't do it. In the Dasa Dhamma Sutta, again you have Vinyu Sabbrahmachari, the other bhikkhus living with you who are intelligent. So this Vinyu Purisa concept is something very important in the Dhamma as a criterion of deciding what is good and bad and what is right and wrong. Okay, so Vinyu Purisas are considered to be the criterion to decide what is good and bad and right and wrong. Although the Buddha does not seem to have defined who the Vinyu Purisas are, it is taken for granted that any society knows who are the acceptable people in that society. For example, it is clear that the Buddha considered the Kalamas to be in that category. Now this quotation is from Professor Premasiri in this small book you have in the page 30. There is a sense in which Buddhism can be said to have admitted the moral autonomy. Moral autonomy means your right, your freedom to decide what is moral and immoral. That is moral autonomy. Okay. Now according to Buddhism, all mature people have moral autonomy. They can decide what is right and wrong for themselves. Okay. That is the idea. Now all of you are accepting Patimokkha rules, then somebody can ask, if I have moral authority, moral autonomy, why do I have to have Patimokkha rules? Actually, you have accepted Patimokkha rules on your moral autonomy, not because somebody else told you, because you think that it is the right thing to do. So it is the result of your moral autonomy. Okay. So this is the concept. It leaves room for the moral agent to solve his own moral problems by his own intelligent analysis of a moral situation. However, this freedom granted in Buddhism does not allow a moral agent to make his moral commitments according to his whims and fancies. What are these whims and fancies? I mean, you can't make moral judgment according to your very personal opinions, very personal likes and dislikes. In other words, even though we have the moral autonomy, we have to make moral decisions according to certain principles. Now, Professor Premasiri says we cannot do that according to our whims and fancies. Whims and fancies are our own personal, very personal prejudices, likes and dislikes, and those things. There are facts about human nature and criteria which any rational moral agent should be conscious of when he is making his own moral decisions. So this on moral autonomy, what he says is very important. You have to really be aware of the nature of the world. You have also to be aware of the things you have to consider when you are thinking about morality. So everybody cannot make moral decisions according to their preferences only. So although there is moral autonomy has to be guided by certain principles. So that is what it says. Okay. So moving on. Now next I will like to come to this what is called golden rule. Actually this concept of golden rule comes from, the word comes in the Western philosophy. It has been used by philosophers like Aristotle, golden rule. So it is not a Buddhist word. But although it is not a Buddhist word, concept is there. This idea, this concept is there. Now this concept in Buddhism is used, what is the Buddhist concept is attanang upamankatva na hanayana ghate. So attanang upamankatva, attupama, atta upama, attupama. So the golden rule in Buddhist ethical discourse, you find this attupama, comparing it to oneself. So attanang upamankatva, attupama. We can say attupama desana. Okay, so the golden rule is the concept of attupama. Attupama desana. Something like that. Now, golden rule is I do not want X to be done unto me. Other beings too who are like myself in this respect do not want X done unto them. I ought not to do unto others what I do not like done unto myself. Therefore, I ought not to do X. Now, okay, it looks a little bit complicated. What it means is this. If I don't like somebody doing something to me, I must not do it to that person too. That means you take yourself as criterion. Okay? You remember we had earlier the concept of attadhipataya. Somewhat similar, but attadhipataya is not exactly this. But atta means they are oneself. Atta adhipataya means you take your own authority. You are there. But here what it means is, here you take atta, yourself. So something, if there is something that you don't want others to do to you, then if you don't like to do that, don't do it to others. If you don't like others to kill you, you don't kill others. If you don't like others to tell you lies, you don't tell lies to others. If you don't like others to steal your things, you must not steal your things. So golden rules is actually, now what is this? Now what is this principle? What is this idea? Now in ethics, golden rule is another criterion of deciding what is right and wrong. Now if you want to decide what is right and wrong, this is one criterion. The criterion means a standard. So how to decide whether something is good or not good? You think, if that happens to me, now I want to do something, but then I have to think, what if somebody else do to me? For example, any minor thing, you have some dirt and your garbage, you put in somebody else's compound. Some people do that. Or you take your dirt from your home and you put in somewhere else on the road. So on that road there are some other houses. Now you can think according to this, how if those people bring their dirt and put in front of you, you don't like it. Now if you don't like that, then you can decide, okay, I must not do this because I don't like if people do that to me. Now in many things, if you can adopt this standard, attanang upamankatva, Buddha says, this attupama is you compare it with yourself, or you put in that situation. You put yourself in the situation of the other person and then question, how if he does it to me, would I like it? No, I would not like it. Then you can decide, okay, then I should not do that. Now this is called golden rule. Now this golden rule can work in many situations. But on the other hand, don't try to think that it can be applicable to minor things. Okay, things like I like ice cream, so Is that okay to think that everybody else like ice cream? No. Maybe I like ice cream, but other people like other things. So there are that kind of differences. But this comes to more, not things like ice cream, but more serious ethical issues. More serious ethical issues means like killing, stealing, telling lies, that type of thing. I mean, you can always decide, look at yourself. Do you like that if somebody does it to you? No, I don't like it. Then you should not do it to others. Now, this is called golden rule. This has been again in, many developed societies. So the concept of golden rule comes from ancient Greek society. But of course, Buddha's teaching is even older than Greek Aristotle's philosophy. But you can see that in India, of course, there was a great civilization in the ancient time, and equally there was a great civilization in Greek and that area, and also in China and other areas where also there were great civilizations. So you can see that this kind of similar ideas being developed in many parts of the world and many great civilizations. So this idea, attanang upamang katva na hanaya na ghataye, you should not harm anybody, you should not kill anybody. Okay. And then the middle one, jivitukamo, amaritukamo, sukakamo, dukkapatikulo. Now this again covers the basic characteristic of human society. Not only human society, any living being, if you take jivitukamo, amaritukamo, what is the meaning of that? Jivitukamo, desiring to live. Amaritukamo, desiring to not to die. Amaritukamo, you don't like to die, you like to live. So that's a basic thing, all of us like to live, we don't want to die, although we have to die one day. Sukha kamo dukkha patikkulo, what is that? Sukha kamo dukkha patikkulo, you like happiness, you like to be happy, you don't want to be unhappy. Now, Buddha gives these two things as a universal characteristic of any being, any living being. Any living being likes to live. Any living being. Like sometimes you see, very small ants. But, suppose you put something, fire or something, they come and they just go like that. Even the very small insect, you can see their behavior, they don't want to die. They always want to preserve their life. And then they don't want unhappiness, they want happiness. Now this is for, you look at the dogs, you look at monkeys, you look at any animal, you see that this is true. And you look at any human being. Jivitukamo, amaritukamo, you like to live, you don't want to die. Sukakamo, dukkha patikkulo, you want to be happy and you don't want to be unhappy. Now this is really the golden rule. Now this is, I think there is nothing very difficult to understand in this. Now we have been talking about the foundations of Buddhist ethics, okay. Now the one last thing I mentioned here is the foundation of this foundation, and then we will see the very last one. A unique feature in Buddhist ethics is that it is not based on any metaphysical view such as the belief in God, or even such beliefs held in Buddhism as karma and rebirth. When the Buddha addressed the Kalamas, he accepted the possibility of morality without them being his followers. In a similar manner, the Buddha advised the inhabitants of the village called Sala, this comes in the Apannaka Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, to be moral whether or not they believed in the life after death. In this sense, the Buddhist ethics may be described as naturalist and based on non-metaphysical rational principles. Now, to wind up our discussion on Buddhist foundations of Buddhist ethics, one last thing I would like to bring out is that Buddhist ethics is not based on any metaphysical views. What are the metaphysical views? Now you know what is the metaphysics means. Metaphysics means things that lie beyond the physical things. Physical things are like tables, chairs and buildings and all that. Things that we can grasp by our senses. Metaphysical means things we cannot grasp by our senses. That is metaphysical. Okay. Physical things we can see, we can touch, we can smell, physical things. Metaphysical means we can't see, we can't touch. Metaphysical things are things that lie beyond our perception. But then if you take Buddhist ethics, we can see that Buddhist ethics is not based on metaphysical things. What I mean by this is, for example, the theistic ethics. If you take a theistic religion, in our evening class, afternoon class, we will be discussing the concept of God. So in a system in which you believe the concept of God, ethics is part of God. In order to follow ethics, you have to believe in God. Then the problem is, if you don't believe in God, then you don't follow that ethics. Okay? So people give up ethics along with the concept of God if they don't believe in God. Now in Judaism and Christianity, for example, you have the concept of 10 commandments. Now according to the Bible, 10 commandments were given by God to the Moses. Okay? 10 commandments were given to Moses by God. Now they are called commandments. Now usually where do you find commands? You have commanders in the army, right? Commanders are in the army. So commander gives the command. Others just do it. In the army, you get a command, you just obey it, right? You can't disobey it. Okay? Then you lose your life. You command means you have to do that. Now in Bible, what you have is the commandments. God's commandments. God commands you to do that. Now the important issue is, of course, if you fear God, then you do that. However, there are so many people in the world who don't believe in God. Now then what happens? Then for those people, because they don't believe in God, they reject the ethics also. Now that is the problem. Because when the ethical principles depend on the metaphysical thing, if you don't believe in metaphysical thing, you don't believe in ethics. Now in Buddhism, we know that there is no concept of God, right? But for example, in Buddhism, there is a concept of life after death. Punabhava, next birth. I mean, if you have got Ubbe Nimasa Anusati Jnana, you can know your past life. But if you don't have get Ubbe Nimasa Anusati Jnana, do we really know that we are going to be born again? As Buddhists, we believe that we will be born again, but do we really know it? Can we say that we know it? No, because we don't see. We don't know, but of course we believe because we are born and brought up. As Buddhists, so we believe, but on the other hand, we don't see it. Interesting example is, this example of what is called, look at the second paragraph. When the Buddha addressed the Kalamas, he accepted the possibility of morality without them being his followers. In a similar manner, the Buddha advised the inhabitants of the village called Sala. This comes in the Majjhima Nikaya Apannaka Sutta. If you want to read that, it's good to read it. Majjhima Nikaya Apannaka Sutta. So in the Apannaka Sutta, these people in the Sala, they say that they don't believe in any religious teacher. They say to the Buddha. They say they don't have a religious teacher. And also it is clear that they don't believe that whether there is an afterlife or not. They don't know. So they don't believe. But then Buddha says, but still you can be ethical. Still you can be moral. I'm not going to describe that in detail, but maybe some other time we can discuss this. But these two instances, Kalama, again they were not followers of the Buddha. They were not followers of any religious teacher. But then to Kalamas, Buddha said, you can still be ethical, even though you don't follow religion. And then for the people in the Sala, this village, Buddha said that even though you don't believe in rebirth, you still be good. Then Buddha said, if there is a rebirth, you will be fine. If there is no rebirth, you will be nice in this world by doing good things. So either way, if you don't believe in rebirth, if there is rebirth, you will be fine after death because you do good things. If there is no rebirth, Buddha says, still you will be okay because people will like you because you do good things. So you will be fine in this life. So read this sutta. This is Apannaka Sutta Majjhima Nikaya. This is in the Majjhima Nikaya. So in that sense, we can say that Buddhist ethics is really naturalist. Naturalist in the sense, by that word, what I mean is, Buddhism doesn't go beyond the ordinary perceived reality, to talk about ethics. Now, if we say that God gives ethics, then in order to follow that ethics, you have to believe in God. And if Buddha says that if you don't believe in rebirth, you can't be a good person, then you have to believe in rebirth. But then if you don't believe in rebirth, then you will not be a good person. But what the Buddha does is, of course, we need to believe the rebirth. That's a different thing. But for those people who did not believe rebirth, Buddha didn't force them to accept, no, you have to accept rebirth. No, Buddha didn't say that. Buddha said, fine, even if you don't believe in rebirth, but still be good. Then he logically showed that if there is a rebirth, you should be born in a good place. And the other possibilities, if there is no rebirth, then still you will be good in this life. There's a very interesting logic there. The logic is that you do some good things in this life, you will be born in heaven. But in heaven, you will be enjoying for a long time. So you do something in a limited period, you get a very, very big, huge benefit. But on the other hand, if you did not do good things in this life, if there is an afterlife, if there is rebirth, then you will be born in the hell. And it will be very, very bad. So, question is, as an intelligent person, what should you do? Either you do good things till you live and be born in heaven for a long time, or you don't do good things while you are living and then born in the hell. What do you want to do? So Buddha says, any rational person, any intelligent person will choose to do good in this life, so that if there is rebirth, he will be rewarded. If there is no rebirth, but still, when you are good, that means you are doing good things to others, so you will be a happy person. You will be liked by society. So like that. Do you see the point? So you must really read the Apannaka Sutta very carefully. Now, Buddhist ethics in that sense, of course, we need to be believing in rebirth, karma, rebirth, those are very important. But what the Buddha did was, even if you don't believe these things, still you can be a good person. But then Buddhist morality, Buddhist sila is not only that. Of course, when you become a monk or nun, we accept many more things and live a life to achieve certain goal. So don't think that Apannaka Sutta or Kalama Sutta is the only thing in Buddhist ethics. But what is important is to show that in Buddhist ethics, even if you are not a religious person, even if you don't belong in any religion, you can still be a good person. Now that is why it is not based on metaphysics. Now metaphysics means if you really say that in order to be a good person, you have to be really believing in God, Now, a lot of people don't believe in God. Then what? Are those people who don't believe in God are bad? No. Some people can be bad, some people can be good people. Now, this is the problem. Now, same way if we say that, okay, in order to be a good person, you have to be believing in karma and rebirth. Some people don't believe in karma and rebirth, but still, does that mean that they are bad people? Not necessarily. Some of them can be bad, some of them can be good. So, in this sense, the Buddhist ethics may be described as naturalist, means natural things, like, things we can see and understand, okay? And based on non-metaphysical rational principles. Non-metaphysical means nothing to do with like concept of God or things we don't see. Now, the important difference finally is karma and rebirth we don't see. But if you have good knowledge, parachitta vijnana nanana, pubbe nivasanussati jnana, then you see karma and rebirth. Buddha has seen it, Arahants have seen it. However, the difference is, even if you have parachitta vijnana jnana or pubbe nivasanussati jnana, you can't see God, because God doesn't exist. You see the difference? When we say Buddhism, sometimes we have metaphysical beliefs like karma and rebirth, but those metaphysical beliefs become metaphysical only for ordinary people. People like Buddha, people like Arahant have realized them. Okay? All right. So this morning what I tried to do was I was summarizing some of the things we did last week about the foundations of Buddhism, and then on the basic principles that Buddhism is based on. And then finally we came to the idea of golden rule. Golden rule, although that name is not used in the Buddhist literature, golden rule is in Buddhism even before Aristotle. But we are using the concept of golden rule because we are talking English here. Okay. So, but in the Buddhist term is actually attupama desana, or another word is for this actually attupa nayika dhamma. Attupama desana, attupanayika dhamma. Attupanayika dhamma means golden rule. So in English it is golden rule, in Pali it is attupanayika dhamma. Is that clear? Okay. So the concept of attupanayika dhamma is even older than the concept of golden rule in Western philosophy. Okay, I will wind up from there, and then thank you very much for listening. Very good that nobody is talking, so but still if you have any questions. Okay, looks like no questions, so yeah. Okay, I will wind up, then we will I will see you in the afternoon 2:30 for the next discussion. Okay, thank you very much.